Did you know, there are three revolutions that have the most impact and influence on this world? Let's look at the following review. The first, American Revolution. The American Revolution was a colonial revolution that took place from 1765 to 1783. Revolution itself means change that takes place quickly and fundamentally. At this time, the British colonies in North America opposed the various policies implemented and then waged a war of independence. The 13 colonies, with French assistance, succeeded in liberating the United States and defeating British colonialism in North America. The American Revolution was the first step in the emergence of a large democratic country in the world, which inspired various similar movements in other parts of the world. Background/causes of the American Revolution. Christopher Columbus's sailing mission to America in 1492 gave rise to a trend of exploration to various parts of the world. England, Spain, and France were two European countries that formed colonies in North America. King James I began a large-scale transmission of his citizens to capture colonies in the New England and Quebec regions. This transfer is based on the need for a large workforce and market to increase trading activities. The British Empire meant that British citizens in the colonies were considered as colonies, victims of trade regulations that only benefited the British Empire. This kind of policy caused a lot of dissatisfaction among the colonists. Those who left Britain to improve their fate ended up as workers who were sucked up for the benefit of their mother country. Chronology of the Revolution. Increasingly burdensome laws and policies for the 13 colonies had reached their peak. Since 1770, Americans began boycotting British products, not paying taxes, and resorting to coercion. The British Empire responded to this by sending thousands of troops to control the situation. March 5, 1770, this army was the cause of the event that became the turning point for the revolution, namely the Boston Massacre. 3 years later, the iconic event the Boston Tea Party occurred. Cargoes of tea from 3 EIC ships were thrown into the sea as a form of colony protest against the monarchy. The British Empire responded by passing the Intolerable Act in 1774. Which generally dissolved independent government in Massachusetts, closed the port of Boston, and implemented a military governor's rule. The colonies responded by forming the Continental Congress that same year. This Congress discussed the efforts of the Continental Powers against increased taxes, the absence of parliamentary representation, and the blockade by England. These tensions culminated in the Battle of Lexington on April 19, 1775. 700 British Army personnel raided Lexington, Concord, Lincoln, Menotomy, and Cambridge to seize weapons allegedly gathered by Continental militia. This conflict was the beginning of the War of Independence between America and England. The government issued a decree deeming Congress a form of rebellion in 1776. Congress responded by declaring the independence of the United States on July 4, 1776. France, Spanish aid, and the Dutch secretly waged a war of independence to defeat England. The United States was able to consolidate 13 states, leaving England in control of New York City's territorial waters. The Battle of Saratoga on October 17, 1777, was an important turning point in the United States struggle. American soldiers were even able to force General Burgoyne to surrender. From then on, the British fought the joining American and French forces, supported by the Dutch and Spanish. In the following battle, the French and American fleets surrounded the British at Yorktown, Virginia in the Siege of the Chesapeake. This pressure forced England to agree to peace in the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The independence of the United States was recognized by the territory that collided with Canada in the north, Florida in the south, and the Mississippi River in the west. The impact of the American Revolution on the world. The American Revolution not only declared independence, but also included points related to human rights, and the right to individual freedom. One of the famous sentences was uttered by the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. This man expressed that humans must be equal and have rights that must not be taken away. These rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Along with that, the American model of the independence revolution also influenced the world. The influence of the American Revolution led to several declarations of independence. Some of these occurred in the 19th century, namely in Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Oceania. The Second French Revolution. The French Revolution occurred in 1789, where the people wanted independence for their rights, which were ignored by the state government. During the leadership of King Louis, likewise, the church has special privileges such as living in luxury, often partying using state money, being free from taxes, and even having the right to collect taxes from the people. The king's power was said to be unlimited. He enforced the absence of a people's representative body so that the nobles acted arbitrarily. The life of the middle to upper class of society, or what is known as the bourgeoisie, causes administration to become complicated, chaotic, and ineffective because the state treasury is continuously decreasing and the state debt is getting worse due to the wars carried out to help the American Revolution. This causes an increasingly growing economic crisis. The picture before the French Revolution that was very prominent was the existence of social inequality, namely the royal family, the nobility, and the church with a luxurious lifestyle, while ordinary people were very miserable, such as being subject to high taxes. The French government, which does not recognize human rights, encourages the people to hold a revolution based on the principle that sovereign power comes from the people, by the people, and for the people. The resistance carried out by the people and their participation in providing a French constitution began to heat up when the National Assembly, as representatives of this group of people, was about to be dissolved by the king by means of armed violence. The peak of the clash, which occurred on July 14, 1789, was marked by the collapse of the Bastille prison as a symbol of the king's absolute power. The fall of the Bastille prison was used as a benchmark for the people as a success in the revolution. The royal flag was replaced with a vertical red, white and blue national flag, and the Marseillaise song was established as the national anthem. The French Revolution questioned how Europe was governed. Marx argued that although it led to extraordinary progress for all of humanity, it failed to fulfill the promise of expanding human freedom. The French Revolution did offer political freedom by supporting private property rights, but this freedom was weakened on the other hand. Apart from that, the bourgeoisie used violence to obtain an independent state, as was illustrated when the king took violent action to dissolve the National Assembly and other organizations so that he remained in power. The French financial oligarchy always supported peace because war suppressed the stock market, just as capitalism developed because the bourgeoisie were in power. Like the nobles and the church, who could be said to be the upper class with special privileges and feudal rights that oppressed the people. This lower class finally fought back to win the battle for democracy and attempted to overthrow capitalism because it had caused absolute poverty. The existence of social classes that differentiated social status was later successfully abolished because of the spirit of nationalism, democracy, and liberalism of the French people in changing a new concept of the state. Before the revolution, it was thought that being a king was a substitute for God in the world, and it was the nobles who determined social status based on heredity. However, after the revolution, the rights and obligations of the state had been regulated in laws that no longer differentiated humans based on lineage. Thus, the events of the French Revolution were the result of lower-class resistance using revolutionary action against the upper class, who tended to live in luxury and harmed the lower class without caring about their fate. The Third Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution of 1905 was a wave of mass political and social unrest that spread throughout the Russian Empire, some of which was directed against the government. This included labor strikes, peasant unrest, and military uprisings, and led to constitutional reforms, including the creation of the State Duma, a multi-party system, and the Russian Constitution of 1906. Causes of riots. According to Sidney Harkave, author of The Russian Revolution of 1905, there were four problems in Russian society that contributed to the revolution. First, the newly freed peasants earned too little and were not allowed to sell or mortgage their allotted land. Second, ethnic minorities resented the government for its Russification, discrimination, and oppression, both social and formal, such as prohibiting them from voting and serving in the Guard or Navy and limiting school attendance. Third, the nascent industrial working class resented the government for doing little to protect them, by banning strikes and unions. Finally, the educated classes instigated and spread radical ideas after the relaxation of discipline at universities allowed the growth of a new consciousness among students. When viewed individually, these problems may not have affected the course of Russian history, but taken together, they created the conditions for a potential revolution. Historian James DeFranzo wrote, "At the turn of the century, dissatisfaction with the Tsar's dictatorship manifested not only through the growth of political parties dedicated to overthrowing the monarchy but also through industrial strikes for better wages and working conditions, protests and riots. Among peasants, demonstrations at universities, and assassinations of government officials, often carried out by socialist revolutionaries." The beginning of the revolution, in December 1904, a strike occurred at the Putilov factory, supplier of trains and artillery, in St. Petersburg. Sympathy strikes in other parts of the city increased the number of strikers to 150,000 workers in 382 factories. On January 21, 1905, the city had no electricity and newspaper distribution stopped. All public areas are declared closed. Controversial Orthodox priest Georgy Gapon, who headed a police-sponsored workers' association, led a massive workers' procession to the Winter Palace to present a petition to the Tsar on Sunday, January 22, 1905. Troops guarding the palace were ordered to tell the demonstrators not to go beyond the certain points. According to Sergei Witt, and at some point, troops opened fire on demonstrators, causing between 200 and 1,000 deaths. This event became known as Bloody Sunday and is considered by many experts to be the beginning of the active phase of the revolution. The events in St. Petersburg sparked public outrage and a series of massive strikes that spread rapidly throughout the industrial heartland of the Russian Empire. Polish socialists call for a general strike. In late January 1905, more than 400,000 workers in Russian Poland went on strike. Half of European industrial workers in Russia went on strike in 1905, and 93.2% in Poland. There were also strikes in Finland and the Baltic coast. Nationalist groups were angry with the Russification carried out since Alexander II. Poland, Finland, and the Baltic provinces all wanted autonomy and freedom to use their national languages and promote their own cultures. Muslim groups were also active. The first Congress of Muslim Unity was held in August 1905. Certain groups took the opportunity to resolve differences with each other rather than with the government. Some nationalists staged anti-Jewish pogroms, possibly with government assistance, and a total of more than 3,000 Jews were killed. The peak of the revolution, Tsar Nicholas II agreed on February 18 to the creation of a State Duma of the Russian Empire with consultative powers only. When power and voter turnout limits were revealed, riots doubled. The St. Petersburg Soviet was formed and called for a general strike in October, refusal to pay taxes, and withdrawal of bank deposits. In June and July 1905, there were many peasant uprisings in which peasants seized land and equipment. Disturbances in Russian-controlled Congress Poland culminated in June 1905 with the Lodz uprising. Surprisingly, only one landlord was recorded as being killed. Far more violence was perpetrated against farmers outside the commune, with 50 deaths recorded. The October Manifesto, written by Sergei Witt and Alexis Obolensky, was presented to the Tsar on October 14. The manifesto followed the demands of the Zemstvo Congress in September, which granted basic civil rights, permitted the formation of political parties, expanded suffrage towards universal rights. voting rights, and establishing the Duma as the central legislative body. The Tsar waited and debated for 3 days, but finally signed the manifesto on October 30, 1905, citing his desire to avoid massacres and his awareness that the available military forces were insufficient to seek alternative options. He regretted having signed the document, and said he felt sick with shame at the betrayal of this dynasty. The betrayal is complete. When the manifesto was proclaimed, there were spontaneous demonstrations of support in all major cities. Strike in St. Petersburg, and other places were officially over or soon collapsing. Political amnesty was also offered. These concessions came alongside a new brutal crackdown on unrest. There was also a backlash from conservative elements of society, with right-wing attacks on strikers, leftists, and Jews. While Russian liberals were satisfied with the October Manifesto and prepared for the upcoming Duma elections, radical socialists and revolutionaries denounced the elections and called for an armed uprising to destroy the empire. Some of the November 1905 uprising in Sevastopol, led by retired Navy Lieutenant Pyotr Schmidt, was directed against the government, while some was undirected. These include terrorism, labor strikes, peasant unrest, and military uprisings, and can only be put down after heavy fighting. The Trans-Baikal Railway fell into the hands of a committee of strikers and demobilized soldiers returning from Manchuria after the Russo-Japanese War. The Tsar had to send a special detachment of loyal troops along the Trans-Siberian Railway to restore order. Between December 5th and 7th, there was another general strike by Russian workers. The government sent troops on December 7th, and heavy fighting began. A week later, the Semyonovsky Regiment was deployed and used artillery to break up demonstrations in shell workers' districts. On December 18th, with about 1,000 people dead and part of the city destroyed, the workers surrendered. After a final standoff in Moscow, the uprising came to an end.